Good morning, Asha. How are you?
Doing very well, Debbie, and lovely to have you on this podcast with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well too, thank you. Enjoying some late Melbourne sunshine. Late in the year.
Later
I'm
in the year,
feeling.
that's right, just before
hmm
the cold hits us.
That's right.
So, Debbie, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, a bit about your background, what do you do, and what interests you?
Okay. Um, so my background, I'm living here in Melbourne now, but I was living in Sydney for most of my life. I've traveled too, um, and I had my kids, uh, three of my children in Sydney and one in Melbourne. Um, and so some of my interests include things like walking, nature, being in nature, um, being in wilderness areas, and also I do love yoga and I do love um, walking dogs. I have a dog. Um, and essentially, I came became very interested in the whole area of natural or what's considered natural birth and alternatives to medicalized birth, and studied Lamar's childbirth education. Um, Went on to learn many different things about the birth world. Um, so, following that, I have worked with women in the birth suite and also in their homes, um, doing things like postpartum massage, postpartum lifestyle plans, and plans to see what sort of support people have and what they need. Helping with people in their houses with their needs so that they can have time for themselves and so that they can have time sometimes with their firstborn while you know the baby's either sleeping and things are being done. Yeah.
Did you work under the official title as a doula or a postpartum therapist when you were working in that capacity?
Yes, I worked as a doula, and
Wonderful.
um, that was what I considered myself and aligned with. Yeah.
I think it's beautiful work. It's great to have you on this podcast where we're looking to work with a lot of women who are on their perinatal journey. So they've either
Yes.
conceived or just given birth or a year and a few months into after their birth situation. And there are several circumstances that women go through right from the time that they plan having a child. And maybe just before we started the podcast, we were talking about how our lives change the minute we think of becoming a mother. So, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear a little more of your thoughts on how women's lives change on their journey to motherhood.
It's such a big journey. Um, I don't know that we really perceive it or understand it as young women
Hmm.
and as prior to having wanting our children, but to some extent we do. But I don't think we can nearly fathom what's in store for us.
Right.
Um, it sometimes makes a difference if you've been around a large family and you've got that sort of contact with, you know, cousins, aunts, other people who've got young children. Um, and that too, I did have that experience in a previous relationship with brothers and young kids there and that sort of situation. But I think it really starts with that whole journey of what you go out there to learn. There's a lot to learn along the way. There's so much to know. Um, and there are so many things that you have to start to decide, do I want to try this on? Is this for me or isn't it? So it's the beginning of the journey of making the choices to be educated and then making those choices for yourself.
True.
Um, there's so much that's pushed at you. So for my first child, like I have all boys, and my first son, um, I had hoped. very much to have a home birth, which is something that I was very keen on a water birth. It didn't need to be at home. I would have been happy to have it within a hospital setting, but there wasn't the opportunity to do that. And, I learnt along the way. I went to some, not Lamar's, I went to a really wonderful woman in the south of Sydney who ran um, classes with, uh, partners. And I remember always having to like elbow my husband to wake him up because he was working really long hours, starting his business. And there's a lot of information to learn. From that moment, I realized that there's so much to take on board. And really, it's some is more important than others, but I'm really glad I did have an experience like that, um, because I've also seen people go to hospital birth classes, which are usually a lot shorter, and learn a lot less and have a lot less support um, along the way. I think what I learnt, I mean, I don't know if that's true for everyone, but I do think that it's a slightly different bond because I felt that there was someone to go back to and speak to about it. So, whereas with the hospital one, I felt that once that's over, there's the next lot and the next lot, depending on your relationship with who you're working with there. And if you're in a midwife's clinic or you're not, and all those sorts of things. Um, I do really, really believe that childbirth education is um, pretty essential for women. There's a lot of questions that you don't just want a quick answer to. You need to have opportunity to investigate it. So, for all of that, I think not everyone can do that, or not everyone chooses to do it. Yeah, not everyone does. I've seen that industry really blossom and grow, and there's a lot available now online as well, which is really, really helpful because not everyone can make those classes. I think I do believe that the most important thing that I got from it is that you need support.
True.
And that support can come from all different directions.
So true. I think it was a privilege that you actually got to do some information gathering even before you gave birth. Because a lot of the times people ask the question, when are you having your child? They don't let
Yes,
you know what happens once you have a child, or even during having the child, what you're going through. A, different parts of our community, different parts of the world, your parents, your family, nobody tells you about that part. And we know that it's going to be painful. A lot of the times, women don't want to know what they may have to endure. So it's very important, and I'm glad you got that bit of education and a little bit of time around it. I sure didn't. I didn't know what to expect
oh wow.
except for what I had just observed. And I was giving birth a little later on in life,
Yep,
right? At least in my mid to late 30s.
yep,
Yeah, so I had heard a lot of stories. So I truly believe it's important that women get this information for themselves so they're well armed, and well prepared, and then they can make choices like you did. Water birth, home birth, hospital birth, whatever it is, it's a choice that they need to make, having all the
totally.
information for them.
And I think the difference, if you can do it with a partner and that hopefully they're not sleeping, too tired to listen to it, is that then they're in the picture. It's not like you've got to tell them again and someone else has told them, so they're listening from a different point of view. Um, and they can ask questions too. And it's different from going to that very, very short doctor's appointment, the quick ultrasound, the this, the that, a few of the questions that you can ask. There's not enough time to explore things there. Definitely. I also feel that, as you just said, and I think Asha, you've really put your finger on you know, on the pulse there, is that what do we know about being a mother, postpartum, how life will look, how do you navigate things, how do you navigate life and work, like all these things. I had this weird, wonderful idea that I'd have other mothers around me who'd have kids at the same time. And one day I'd look after all their kids, and another day they'd look all after mine, and it would all be roses. And, at the end of the week, we'd all be happy parents and we'd live ever happily ever after. And boy, was I wrong. Yeah. I didn't really have people around me that had kids at the same age. My first child I actually had late too at 37. Um, and so, yeah, we actually don't know. The other very, very interesting thing, Asha, which I think I realize is you get perspective once you've had a child and then maybe you have another and there's another pregnancy. And even unfortunately, people who have miscarriages or stillbirth, there's a perspective around things once you've gone through that process that you can't have not having gone through it. Um, after your first child, I had issues. My water birth didn't end up being a water birth. My water birth ended up being called herald bleeding at week 30. Let me see. Just was it week 30? I think we were week 34. So it's a little early. That 36, 37 week mark is where you really want to be so that all the breathe, the airways are all developed. I went in with bright red blood and they told me to come in, and it just felt a bit strange. And they kept me in overnight. My husband was busy working, and they said, "Look, you can't come home. The ultrasound machine isn't working." Now, that doesn't happen in a major hospital, does it? Like, that's sort of an unusual situation. And I believed them. And they basically, kept me in, wanted to observe. The next day, they took me to the ultrasound machine that was magically working. And they found I had what was called placenta previa, which is a low-lying placenta. So when the baby tries to come out, they can get they can basically be drowned by the volume of blood, and sometimes, unfortunately, the mum hemorrhages too. So, um, the beautiful woman I met there, who I didn't know, public system, um, just incredible experience. She said she drew it for me and she said, "Look, I've only got one suggestion for you, and this is a cesarean." And she said, "If you want a second opinion, I'm going to give it to you as well, and it's a cesarean." And she said, "I want to save your life and I want to save the baby's life. And you've come this far. We have to go there." So it was a bit of a change of plan. We planned a date another, week or so ahead, and we went ahead with it, and everything was fine. Yeah,
Your
absolutely. So
first boy.
first boy, healthy. Um, yeah, the Caesar was it was okay. I can't say it was a bad experience, but it's certainly a little stressful. And there's a recovery time.
For sure. For sure. It's so important that we get medical professionals who give us that second opinion and a chance for us to get a second opinion. I'm really glad you met someone like that. Sudden information, we trust the doctors to do a lot of things for us.
Yes,
Apologies for the
yes,
background. It's important for us to get the information that we need to decide how we go ahead. And they need to be open to. I know in India, we have a lot of doctors pushing for C sections because they can control and they can make sure that the birthing process is in a safe environment.
yes.
However, a lot of people do prefer natural births, and there are risks that come along with it. So it's very important that you, me, and all the mothers to be get that information and then they can make that choice.
I absolutely 150% agree with you. I think that we have to be sovereign birthers. We have to take our own choices and controls and have around us guardians who look after us. So, I've heard of a lot of people who want to do VBAC after a cesarean. So, for good VBAC, too, I think a lot of people want to have more control over their environment. And if they happen to be in a hospital, that can involve things like covering machines and having low lights and being able to have privacy and not to be disturbed as much as possible.
True.
And very important.
A lot of moms don't even think about the option of VBAC because we feel that once you have a C section, all your subsequent births need to be C sections.
Absolutely. And that is a myth that is propagated very much in many circles. Um, and unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, there are people out there that can break that. But I'd like to tell you two stories related to that. Um, and I think it's really relevant to what you're saying. So I was keen to have a water birth and a natural birth, but that's not what happened, and it was okay. And then following that, I had a another pregnancy, um, which I will write about very soon, which was not the sort of pregnancy. Not the pregnancy was great. The pregnancy was good. Um, but it was a very difficult time for me in general. My eldest, a couple of years had passed, my eldest had broken his leg, and I was 6 months pregnant, and I was wheeling him around in a three-wheeler pram that was he was a bit too heavy for it, but he couldn't walk. And I had him on the lounge room floor with a tomato sauce bottle to go to the toilet. Like things were difficult. He had a thigh high cast. So it's a little difficult when you're pregnant. And we had to rush him down to the local hospital. We were living 18 kilometres out of a reasonably big centre. So we had to take him to the outpatients, and, it was hard work. And navigating a second birth, which was share care. Now, I haven't got a problem with share care, where you have a doctor, you go and see them, and then you do some of your hospital appointments with your doctor and some at the hospital. The hospital, which at this point can remain nameless, was an area that took a lot of different people in. There was the local people there. There was the people from the 18, 20 kilometres away, that area. And there was also a further town where they had a jail where sometimes they had to see people from the jail as well. So there was a big population, and it was quite an incredibly stressful environment. So I didn't enjoy going there. But I felt with a second birth, I can go with the flow. I've done it before. It'll be all right. And with that second birth, as you can imagine, I was actually keen to have a VBAC. So I also experienced at that time in my life a little window opened to the whole birthing world and the problems in the birthing world. The next closest hospital didn't have a full-time anaesthetist. So that meant that people who were wanting to have Caesars, if they turned up at the hospital, they couldn't have them. They were sent 70 kilometres away in an ambulance to the other hospital, and frequently gave birth along the way on the road because they would have to stop and give birth, or in the back of the ambulance. And we're talking about Australia, not
Wow.
a third world country. I'm
Wow.
talking about New South Wales, I'm talking about Katoomba and Penrith, and I'm talking about population areas that are fairly large. So I went in my pregnant year then, probably before my son broke his leg, to a protest in front of the hospital, to protest for them to actually bring a full-time anaesthetist to this area so that people could turn up and have a cesarean at the hospital.
That's scary. That's truly
And
scary.
it's very scary. And I met my doula. I was there at the protest, sort of saying, look, I don't know these people. I don't know much about doulas. I don't know much about anything, but here I am, and I really believe in the cause. And this is roughly my local area. We should do something. And I said, I'm having a baby. And she said, wow, and where are you having it, et cetera, et cetera. We got talking. I said, look, I'd really love you to be my doula. And that was a great experience. And then I met her at my home. She accompanied me to my birth in the hospital. We had done a birth plan, which is very different. Well, I had tried to do a birth plan with my first son, but we had to change. We were following things. She was fabulous. She was helping me with my thinking and my breathing and certain stretches, which a little bit related to yoga, the opening and being forward, a lot of the leaning forward and being on four and helping the baby get to the right, having the space. Anyway, I want to just get to the point here, because will be where I write a lot more about. I believe that I experienced obstetric violence because I was going in there on a regular basis, and there was a lot of coercive behavior there. They told me that there was something wrong with this, but they didn't. And with my uh, blood supply to my placenta, but yet they had results with scans and ultrasounds which didn't prove that. They were trying to get me to have a Caesar. And at week 38, they wanted me to have an internal, um, to look inside internally, and I didn't want to do it with someone I didn't know. Um, so I turned up there and showed up there when I was in labor, but it was very early labor. And I hadn't had labor before. So it was the first time I was in labor, and it started and stopped, started and stopped, started and stopped over 2 or 3 days. I was told by the midwives at the time that really I wasn't ready. I should go home. It didn't happen to be very favorable conditions at the time. There wasn't warm water in the showers. And then I got shouted at by the same person that wanted to do the inspection. He was the doctor on duty at the time. He shouted at me and said, "If you don't stay in the hospital," um, he basically threatened me that I would have to stay in the hospital, or, you know, he was actually trying to put fear into me. And I
Yeah.
had the alternative view of the midwife saying, "Look, you're not really ready." And the moment he shouted at me, the moment my labor stopped, I felt unsafe. A woman, we are humans, we are also animals. The moment you don't feel safe, you do not want to give birth in that place.
Mm-hmm.
So I had some alternative arrangements in my head through my doula and through the other doula who was actually at the time training to be a midwife. They had introduced me to a midwife who was a registered midwife for home birth. And I had decided that that's what I was going to do. And I did.
Mm-hmm.
And even though this story is a little difficult, Asha, what I want to tell you and what I understand is that um, it's a little complicated, but I just want, for these purposes, without going into too more detail about what happened, is that my labor stopped. They didn't check to see if my waters had, actually my waters had broken. And I went home and I set up for 2 days later that I was going to have a water birth in my home. We brought the pool, we set it up. I proceeded and I did birth at home beautifully. My son crowned. It was a beautiful experience. I had wonderful help from my doulas, but unfortunately, my son was stillborn.
So sorry to hear that, Debbie.
It wasn't an easy experience, and it wasn't what we were expecting. And I had to go to hospital and transfer because I couldn't, birth my placenta, and thereon and thereon. The obstetric violence didn't end there. The hospital where I went to leaked my personal information and published a story on page 4 of the Sydney Morning Herald about how a home birth mum refuses medical help, which isn't really the case. I had alternative plans, and they made a whole lot of uh, basically lies about me, that I didn't do certain checks at certain weeks, which is also fake because I did. All sorts of stuff dribbled in, and the information was leaked by a nurse there to a journalist. So not only was that, I had friends in Sydney who knew who I was, even though my name wasn't given. So it was libel. It was many, many things that I couldn't do a lot about. This is indeed obstetric violence. It exists in our system, and unfortunately, I got the boot kicked into me when I was down. It was a difficult recovery, a very difficult recovery mentally. Yes, I did have postnatal depression. I had to, you know, have my milk come in and then let it go and all sorts of things. It was a difficult time. But the reason I'm telling you about this, I now can talk about this, which 10 years ago I couldn't. And I've done a lot of work around it. But I still very much believe that we have to stand in our space, and I had to do that. Following that, I had I was planning possibly to have a VBAC, but that wasn't possible. I did manage to get pregnant again, and it was necessary for me to go on bed rest and have my baby in the hospital after that. And you learn about your body all the time. So, with this perspective, I learned about what I wasn't going to accept. And I should never have done the share care at that hospital. I should never have done it, but I did because I thought I'll be fine. I don't need to worry too much. I've done this before. I also learned that um, it is important to have good people around you. I went to a specialist in Westmead Hospital, which is a special hospital. It's like next to the Children's Hospital in Sydney.
This
And
is for
I
your
had
third boy.
this is for my third boy, and I was there on bed rest, and a lot of antenatal women coming in and going, and eventually had him as a Caesar, but it was very close call. Um, but my last child, who I had at 48, was a natural birth. And he
Wow.
was a beautiful, beautiful healing experience with an amazing obstetrician. And this is what I wanted you to say, to tell you, Usha. There are great people out there. We don't always find them immediately, but Dr. Kashup, who I will say because his name needs to be mentioned, is an incredible hero, an incredible blessing to women. He knew my situation. He knew that I was a high risk mother, and I saw him and saw him and saw him, and even I was too scared to say to him, I want to have a VBAC.
Of course.
And when I said it to him after weeks and weeks, there was silence, and then he just went, I think you can have a trial of labour. If things show otherwise, we'll look at it otherwise, but there's no reason why you shouldn't try. And this was after 1, 2 cesareans, a birth, and here I was. So there'd been enough space between as well, healing time on a physiological level. So I knew from my previous birth that I must have some issues with my amnio sac and tightening, and the possibility of that being an issue, because that was a little bit of an issue with my third son, and definitely with my second son, who was a stillbirth. So I was aware of that. But I was guided by a very experienced doula who worked really well with this obstetrician, and she sent him out to have a coffee and said, we don't need you here, it's okay, we'll call you later. And then he came back and did some stitching for me. And I just want to tell you, though, that the fear does exist. And women have a lot of fear around not knowing, being worried, being put into a state of fear. It wasn't until after I gave birth and he came to visit me in the hospital. I was at Cabrini. Um, and this is the weird thing, because he's similar age to me as a 21-year-old. He said, wow, you've just given birth to. I said to him, I really wanted to ask you, but I was always too scared. You said I could have a trial of labour, and here we go. I've done it. I said, what is the incidence? Like, what are the risks to me for doing VBAC in this situation? And he said it to me like that. He said, why didn't you ask me? I could have told you that with every VBAC, there's a higher risk. And he gave me the numbers like that. And he'll give the 1 in 10,000. I said to him, you know why? Because I was so scared that you wouldn't say it was okay. So we are definitely surrounded by that fear. Yeah?
It's just not normal that people ask for VBAC. Women don't know about it. And when
No,
we do understand what are the options in front of us, we are told once a C-section, always a C-section. We're
totally.
told if your baby is too big, you cannot have a VBAC. That
Yes.
is what was the case in my situation. I was clearly told your baby's too big. He was about 4.32 kgs when he was born. And we were told it is not possible and it's a very high risk for you to do this. And so they scheduled the C section for me Although I had requested for VBAC, I went to different hospitals. I'm so happy that you found an obstetrician who worked with you. That's all
And
that
he is
necessary.
such a champion for women.
Yeah,
On his wall, he's got all the babies that have been born, and he truly believes in it. He finds it difficult in the system too, but he's very, very pro giving the midwives more support to do more of the work that they can with women. And sometimes what you'll find is if you have a very proactive midwife there with you as well in the birth, it's also incredibly helpful. To be and if you have them in your team, and if you're going to see the midwives clinic, that's really, really helpful. Um,
true.
so it is an area that there are, many, many good obstetricians, but it is also an area where you can be completely ignored. So in my very first, going back to my first experience, bit of a story, my husband met this particular person. He taught him something, and then, they knew each other outside, and he's the head of a department somewhere in Sydney. Okay, we'll go to him. I would go every week, or every time I had to go, quickly do the urine test. Bing, bing, bing. The nurse would see me, get to the certain point, and very often mine was very, very, I didn't have any issues. So everyone else would be going in before me. I'd be waiting there. I'm still waiting to go in. He actually rang up once and said, "Oh, I think my wife's lost in your office. Where is she? We've been waiting for so long." But I asked that doctor, after having had an ultrasound, about my first son's situation. The sonographer said to me, "You can't quote me on this. I'm not medical in that way. But if anything, I would ask your obstetrician if that is possibly a low-lying placenta developing." And I did. And not say, I mean, it's probably possible that it could be, and many things can happen, but I didn't hear a word. And then I also asked him, I said, "Oh, what's your opinion about water birth?" And he said, um, "No opinion. I don't have an opinion. Water's for dolphins. People walk on land." And I said, "Okay."
That's an
And
opinion.
once again, Asha, guess what I did? I was 18 or 19 weeks. I ceased going to him.
Hmm.
I decided this isn't the sort of person I need. And don't forget that this is the head of a department. He saved the life of one of my husband's clients on his bus. She was here from overseas, suddenly had a hemorrhage, and so I knew that he was an excellent obstetrician, but he didn't align with my beliefs.
Yeah.
And he didn't try and come close to me. I'd had always 2 minutes of his time. It was always the nurse who was very sort of, I don't know, just methodical, but it wasn't like going to a midwife's clinic where they ask you lots of questions around. I didn't feel like I was being treated like a whole person. And I'll have you know that yes, he's probably still there, still head of the department,
Hmm.
and I wish him well. Like he probably saves and helps a lot of women,
Mm-hmm.
but he was not right for me. And I never looked back. I went to that midwife's clinic in the Randwick Children, I think it's called Mother and Children's Hospital there. Um, and look who I met, an absolute angel of a lady who helped me. And she actually, it was it was the beginning of her career. She came and gave me a teddy bear, and she said, "I'm so honored to have been part of this journey and be able to help you." So, you meet those people on your way, but it's
Yeah.
not always that's experience. My second experience was a trip to hell and back.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
And you just wonder. So it's taught me that yes, you need to maybe be a bit flexible, but you cannot give up on what you think is what you need. Um, when I had bed rest with he's now my middle son. After what had happened previously, I was obviously fairly um, careful. Um, you could almost say I was hyper vigilant to some
Yes.
point.
Naturally.
And and something that you would know and love to hear is that I did a yoga nidra every single day, And I never had the slightest worry. I never worried about losing. I never had any. They used to call me the Buddha mother because I was happy and I was putting on more weight. I'd never been bigger. Um, and I had a very, very happy pregnancy. Even though the previous situation had happened, I just, I knew I wanted to blow those fears away. And I knew that I have to do it for myself to trust that I can get to this next thing. So, yeah, when I was in there in bed rest, uh, sorry, I just got off track with that, but, that I found I sort of got there because I was losing amnio fluid. And I was thinking, oh, this isn't normal. And I just quickly took my eldest kid's backpack, put some clothes in and said, I think grandma's going to see you tonight. You're going to be going to her place. Run to my neighbor and said, I need your help. I need you to drive me down to the closest specialist ultrasound. I didn't have an appointment. I just went
Mm-hmm.
straight in there and said, I'm really sorry, but I really need to see someone here. I'm
Mm-hmm.
really worried I might lose my baby. And and this is on the back of, I'm doing the yoga nidra and I'm doing everything I need to be doing. And would you like a coffee?
Right.
Yep. Or would you like a biscuit? Yeah, I'll have another one. Great. I'm feeling good about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw me and I had lost about equivalent of half my amnio fluids. And they said, you have to go straight to Westmead, which I did. And then I consulted with someone in Westmead and they said, look, you've got to do bed rest. It will heal. The little tear, sorry, the leak will tear and you'll be okay on bed rest. So I drove myself crazy for 6 weeks being on bed rest, but it did help. And what I really want to come back and focus on, because I so connect to what you're saying about the emotional toll on women. I was in that hospital meeting. People came in and out, antenatal, you share rooms. It was no help that they were actually doing renovations and there was a jackhammer there, but that's another story. I met a lovely, lovely woman who was next to me who was in there for placental bleeding at week 26, and that's not a good situation. And I knew that all the midwives there, and she suddenly reached out to me and said, I really need to go to the toilet really suddenly and it feels heavy. And so I quickly got a midwife and I said, she needs your help now. And then in seconds, they took her to the birthing room. So I knew it wasn't going to be a good outcome, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Um, and her little
Sometimes it's
three-year-old
too
came
early.
in. It was very sad. Her little three-year-old came and he was crying, and I was trying my best to hold all my stuff together and do my meditation and look at that boring TV there and just go, yeah, it's all right. You're going to make it. You're going to make it. And my waters broke at that evening. My waters broke because we need support. We need to feel emotionally held. We need to feel okay. And they weren't allowed to tell me what was going on because of what had happened to me, but I vibrationally felt it. And my waters broke right that evening. And he came, that's why I had to have a cesarean quickly. But the placenta wasn't in the right place yet. It was too early
I
because,
see.
it was earlier than, week 38 or week 37. So I think we were a week 34.
Okay.
So we're so bound by the container we're in as well. And
Mm-hmm.
we are inside a big container, which is society, which you've talked about before. And I do believe that our very much our environment also creates, you know, a difficult environment for women with postpartum depression.
You're not allowed to say that you're in depression at times.
No, you have to be the mother that copes. I mean, whether you have a Caesar, especially if you have a natural birth, like, well, you haven't had a Caesar and healthy baby, and yeah, and what do you do if if you have psychosis from if it flips to psychosis? What do you do? These things are serious.
I've been there. It's happened.
Wow.
With my first child, 6 months in, I went into psychosis. I was hospitalized. My parents and my family had no idea what was happening, including my husband, who had just visited me the night before. He left, and
Wow.
the day after, I went into psychosis because I was in depression. People didn't realize that, and it was a C-sec. It started with a traumatic C-sec, and if you go into psychosis, people are like, everything seems fine for you. So they're not, from their perspective, they may not be able to understand what's happening with you.
Yeah,
So
that's
this
right.
situation is building up in your head most of the times. There'll be a lot of leading factors to it. This was my situation. I'm not sure if the circumstance where people don't have support is just the father and the mother looking after the child day in, day out, no other social interaction, a busy, hectic schedule with the baby, going back to work within 6 months, 4 months even.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. And when that happens, you better be so strong and build yourself up to face what you can, and also have a community around you which will give you that hand when you need it the most. And you need to build that from the time you've just conceived, because it's
I
not.
agree with you. I totally agree with you. And you know what you can't see from here is going on there. Like, how are you ever going to imagine when you plan to have a child, the thoughts of a happy baby, a happy family? Where in your picture, in your mind, does that even, in your wildest dreams, where does it come in? It doesn't, right?
Yeah,
So how can you plan for it in a way if
yeah,
you don't know? The only way to plan is to know that support's so needed, even if you don't have that situation,
yeah,
and then work back from it, because then when people do need that because they've got those issues, they need it even more.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I often say to mothers, if I see them, awkward situation trying to feed and do something, I say, can I hold that? Sit down, take it easy. Don't rush. Take 5 more minutes. Make it easier for yourself.
Mums
You
need
know,
that.
what can I do to make it easier for you? Because as a society, we're not, we're pretty slow in doing those things here. It's things are changing, but it's, the picture I think today is a healthy mom with her pram, striding out off to Pilates, got a few vet groceries in the pram, and everything's okay. You know?
Yeah, I know. I know that. I and all the moms who look at social media and want to be that perfect mom with a happy, bubbly kid and a perfect body that just bounced back within 6 months, no aches, no pains, a social life. You are drinking something with your friends, your baby's smiling in the pram. That's just not a reality. It may not be for years
No,
after you give birth.
that's
Social media
exactly
is
right.
doing you an injustice when they send out pictures like that in the world all the time. That's not the reality for 90% of the moms. Maybe, yeah.
I would say that that's very true. Then you often find, that even gets exaggerated when you go to a play group. There's going to be the mums that have the kids that sleep and those that don't. And then there's judgments that come in. I knew someone at my play group who didn't tell me they had a home birth for years because she was too ashamed. I mean, what are we doing to ourselves? We can't even talk about our choices. If I want to tell you that I stripped off in my house and smoked something and did this, okay, you might look at me in a strange way, but I don't know. It feels to me that we're being judged for making choices.
We absolutely are, because I think we're going upstream. The majority of the medical community wants to have severe C-sections. I've
I
spoken
totally
to
think that.
obstetricians and they have said that it's easier for us to control the time of the birth around the time that we work, if you can believe that. It's
Yep.
safer when we are available for our patients.
Yep.
We can control complicated circumstances. I get all of that. But if the
Yep.
mom's choice is to have a home birth and it's possible, then it needs to be the first option for her. It,
It's a system of high control, and it comes even from the hospitals, the way they run the hospitals, the way they run, for profit, the way these days women are. pushed out of the hospital really fast. There's not much time for any um, postnatal education, any time for breastfeeding education, any time for getting used to anything yourself, dealing with a condition you might have or your baby might have. Um, it is not baby friendly. I have heard of all sorts of initiatives. I mean, you can go from one end to the other. There's an amazing organization called Babies by the Sea, where they actually birth in the sea. Some people do not agree with that and think that could be polluted. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of different choices. Um, and I think what we do need to do is have the belief in ourselves to be able to investigate things and follow through with that. I have a colleague that started VBAC Warrior, where she talks about, giving people those opportunities and those rights and learning about it. She doesn't even, it's even a very affordable thing that she's created, and that's as a result of her own experiences. Um, and I think there are many, many people out there trying to discuss options. It's just a very controlled world. And even the obstetricians that support, who are a little bit more in the minority, often don't get, it's a little dangerous for them to be too left of center
True.
for
True.
their fraternity. So I get that. And I think um, that's a problem. And I think, Asha, in the rise of what's been going on here lately, or what we've heard about post-COVID and the rise in, domestic violence, it certainly doesn't help women who are having all these struggles postnatally. It just adds to their burden.
It does. We just need to. I spoke about how it is convenient for C-sections to happen. On the
Yep.
other hand, when mums want a natural birth and they could have had natural births, but they chose or C-section was imposed on them, it is a life-threatening operation, a
Oh,
life-changing operation.
totally. Totally.
The recovery is so much harder for these mums,
Yes.
and you push that on them. That's not fair.
I'm very much with you on that. I think that you've got to remember it's not a small operation. They're cutting you in half. Yeah, cutting all your muscles, your ability to get up and move, your ability to do all the things you are trying to do for yourself and your baby are hampered. Your ability to be a mum in your own environment again is difficult. I mean, um, yeah, just all of those things. And the psychological scarring for many is really difficult. Birth trauma is alive and well. We have
I
it.
will say, yeah,
And I think where I then moved is I went to do some trauma therapy, which helps people move them out of victim back into having their own power and being able to deal with, in their eyes, the perpetrator or the person that's made them make certain choices and gain back some of that power again, because obstetric violence and I'm not calling all C-sections that, but I think the whole altogether it really puts a woman in a totally vulnerable and sometimes like I'm not going to say as far as lifelong, but it can continue for many, many years, that her depression can affect her life, what goes on around her, her relationships. Um,
the
really,
children.
it really affects her children. It affects everything.
True.
And there's been lot of work into postnatal depletion as well, after one child actually recovering and then having another one. And then again, if you're not fully recovered and if you're carrying with you birth trauma, which attacks our systems and, our guts and everything else and our nervous systems are, in a very difficult place. We can be reactive, we can be super vigilant and anxious, and it certainly doesn't serve us.
True. True. I was reading up on postnatal depletion because one of my friends gave me the suggestion to look up a book,
Yep.
and it made a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense to understand that these symptoms, it may not be a clinically diagnosed
Totally.
postnatal depression situation, but just the fact that you've carried on the trauma after your birth, multiple births, years into your recovery, where you've not been actually given a chance to truly recover, which means that you're in depletion and you're just carrying on. No wonder mums are overworked, stressed out. There are anger management issues because all of this has to
Yes.
come out some way.
Yes.
You
And
can't show it with
and
your colleagues. You can't show it. You
you could
can,
be
but
doing it to yourself as well.
yeah,
You could just be cutting yourself down inside.
yeah, yeah. As so many mums do.
And you know what? At the end of the day, what we're doing is we're affecting our society too, you know, our ability to be a healthy society. We
It's true.
we're not healthy if only some, the other sectors are healthy and we're not. At the end of the day, there's that's not health. I think there's a lot of silence. I think there's a lot of weeping in the dark. And we do look out. Women are great like that though, because we look to circle, we look inwards. We want to talk about it to some extent. We want to explain it and do something. And the Gidget ad was very good that I saw at Flinders Street, where there's a woman, sort of, the baby's crying and it's focusing on the baby, but the mother's over in their corner with a hand on her head, sitting in the corner against the wall, not being able to get up to attend to her, and not having it. Looked as if, she's out of focus, the baby's sort of in focus, but it was all distorted. It's like it's a distorted situation. And how do you help? What do you do to make this better? And I'm sure you've probably read too that, there's this traditional idea. It's not so much from, my background, sort of Hungarian and English, but there are in many traditions, in the Chinese tradition, I think in the Indian tradition, in um, probably in Tibetan too, that they take that 6 weeks, but they don't just say, come back to the doctor's appointment in 6 weeks and check up, see if you're ready to go to your Pilates class. It's 6 weeks where the mother's given massage. I'm sure you know all about that, the Ayurvedic, and you're looked after, because those 40 days, roughly 40 days, if you give that woman that 40 days of total care and give her space, allow her to wash her hair and have the shower and sit in the sun and have beautiful warming foods, she's going to get through like the next 40 years of bringing up those kids, the generation. Otherwise, she's going to break down along the way, because it won't be invested in her that she's got to, when a baby is born, a mother is too, and she's got to look after her. See, it's such a beautiful start to it when we actually take on board looking after the mother first
True, true.
and allow her to process. I mean, if there's been trauma, okay, maybe this is the beginning of it. It might take a few more steps, and I believe it's very important, if she's going to give birth again, that we try and get there in that intrapartum time to break that cycle, to break that trauma, and to be able to make her as whole as possible, you
You bring
know?
up such an important concept, and yes, it's a tradition in India that for the first month after giving birth, those 30, 40 days, you
Yeah.
have someone to help you with your
Yep.
child,
The
take care
doula
of your
does,
child
or the mother,
and the mother
grandmother.
with her nutrition, with her massages, with
Yes.
some other traditions that are done for her recovery so that she's not pushed back into the society because she is so vulnerable at that time. The child is vulnerable, she's vulnerable, and everybody needs to just gather around them, form a cocoon for that mom to just rest, recuperate, and come back stronger. Just
Just
feel a
right.
little like her old self again. That's so important. That's something that I've been working on, reading up on in different cultures, connecting with people who are responsible for doing such things, even years after mothers have given birth, where they go to retreats and spend these therapeutic days with the
Yes.
women who can do
Yes.
these ceremonies for
Yes.
them.
Yes.
There's some beautiful things happening around the world. Not enough, but people are talking more about it. In Korea and in some of the Asian countries, you have hospitals where you get post birth support. You can stay there for a
Great.
month and then you'll have all the support for you, even if you, especially if you can't get it at home, because most of us
Lovely
are away
idea.
from our parents.
Yep.
It is a beautiful concept, and it's such a necessary concept for every single woman who gives birth.
I think you're absolutely right there that we need to look more into how we can integrate it into our version of the world here. I mean, is it a doula at home? Is it a combination of that and a community where you can come in and drop in and people can be helping you there with your child? You can be speaking to other women. You can get massages. You can have quiet time. You know, all of those things. Like, how does it work? And what are the best models of it? Yeah, and I think you're right. I definitely think you're right that it's it's if we plan and we know and we've seen and because it's touched you in such a way and it's touched me in such a way that people then become, you know, this groundswell of I want to make change and I want to see it happen. Um, it's it's becomes more important to us to really connect into that. I think it's a difficult I think when the medical fraternity and you know all of the alternative therapists and things are still sort of in many ways dealt with as separate entities. Like it's
Yeah,
hard to see it when it's
I
not
know what you mean.
holistic.
I know what you mean.
And I think the holistic thing is the answer. And I do believe there are little centers, like you said, that do create that when they're looking at sleeping patterns and nutrition and your mental health and everything. But it isn't,
The
I mean,
norm,
a
yes.
lot of this stuff is expensive also,
Oh yeah.
and it's not supported. And I
Yes.
think uh, definitely something that I'm working on at the moment is Zen Mum workshop where I'm
Hmm.
working with another colleague who is a psychologist, and we're looking at just bringing little bites. Like you
Mm-hmm.
probably know too that these days everybody wants to have everything quickly
Mm-hmm.
because we're sort of time poor and we're somewhere between being online and in face to face and hybrid working and whatever we're doing. Just to make small circles where we meet with people and we bring up the whole idea of what brings us joy and calm and connection. And connection does that a lot too, being held and being with each other in a really supportive environment so that we can sort of have a little bit of perspective on what we need. And then giving to ourselves can then help us be who we want to be in our other world, in our family, in our career, with our communities, with our other extended family. But it sort of goes back to that whole idea. If you can't get it yourself, how can you fill everybody else's,
Cup.
jar and
Yeah.
cups and yeah, wrong word. How do you do that if you
Yeah.
can't get it yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And it's
important.
fairly difficult in a family of boys at times.
Four boys. Bravo, Debbie.
Yeah. Do you have
Wonderful.
girls, boys?
Two boys.
Two boys. Okay.
I gave up after the second boy. I was like, I wanted girls. Two boys, wonderful boys. Wouldn't trade them for the world. But I thought, if I have another boy, it'll just be. I mean, there's two of us, we can chase two. But if there's a third one, they'll overpower us.
Yeah, yeah. Three is an interesting number. I think then three is when it starts to tip a bit. And that's
Yeah.
how, having a child at 48 was a huge change because we'd sort of already, settled and developed things. And, we're at that sort of stage you can start being a little bit freer. And that's like, wow, here come the pregnancy clothes. This is going to change. Um, and look, it was a fairly mad affair. And it was, luckily, like, thank every power in the universe that um, it was healthy and that we didn't have any, like, really difficult issues to deal with. Um, Certainly a lot harder to do it when you're older, I can tell you.
Mm.
Um, and we have big gaps with our children, which sometimes quite difficult to bring us all together and do similar things together. Also, not having a lot of family support. Both my husband and my parents are no longer with us, and that's difficult. Um, I don't come from a large family, which is also not so simple. Yeah, not having the support. I also find, Usher, I've met a lot of people in Australia um, who, particularly I find in Melbourne, because it's a fairly family orientated place, is you often find, there's those that have got relatives and they're all sort of busy organizing all their stuff, and then the ones that don't. And the ones that don't, I've sort of gravitated towards largely in my own personal female, um, yeah, my friends.
Mm.
Partly because, you need different things and you need each other's support. And there must be a lot of people that don't have the support.
There are. I'm sure you've seen on groups. This is how I know that there are people like that looking out for people. Moms, whenever they are, you have a lot of moms reaching out saying that I'm alone by
Yes.
myself. This is my circumstance. Are there
Yep.
others like me who I can connect with? All
I
the time.
totally agree. I've answered back to people who were saying, "Oh, look, I'm looking for another mum." And I've said, "Look, there are local playgroups, which is where I started, which wasn't bad, and I've still got some friends from those today. I mean, any group, you don't know how many people you're going to connect with. Um, I've got clients through clients, through the same thing. I was massaging that person, and then they met this other woman at a group, and then they recommended. So, yeah, we meet each other through recommendation and connections. And I did recommend the mini workshop, but sometimes people don't know you, or it's for me, this is a new thing, and it takes time to get some momentum as well. So I hope to be working with Playgroup Australia to further this whole idea that mums go there with their
Beautiful.
kids, but mums need things for mums.
True.
And like your beautiful idea of Ayurvedic or yogic or combination or like holistic care type retreats. And was involved in a postpartum retreat
Mm-hmm.
once where we invited women and we did lots of great things, created something. I might see if I can show it to you. It's a beautiful set of cards where, you know, women also have a whole lot of societal do's and don'ts. So, um, I don't want my mother-in-law to be at the birth, on one side of it. On the other side is like, well, I can thank her and ask her to do a whole lot of other things, but I can have the option to ask her not to be at the birth. If that's your choice, like I can ask her to cook and she might be an amazing cook. Maybe what's what I need to ask her to do. Be there, support me, make sure there's a feast when we come home and keep it going for me. There are ways that we can learn to deal with the demands and more than anything, deciding what we want and what we don't, like the boundaries of when to say no to things
Mm-hmm.
for everyone's better. If you say no to the things you don't want, the end of the day, and you're strong in it, if you can say it in a way that also supports that other person, that they understand and that you accept and value them for who they are, but you've said what you want to say, I think we become stronger as women as well.
Yeah. Keeping it bottled up is not an option. It's not good
It
for
doesn't
anyone.
help us. It doesn't help us. I, from my experience of having had stillbirth, I was in a small place. So until people knew, I had a few instances where someone gave me some flowers. And when I looked at them, I just didn't know what to say because these flowers are flowers I'm going to take to the grave, but they are thinking they're giving me flowers to welcome. And, you know, in a small community, you also have polarized views pretty quickly. So, you might have that group up at the pub saying, "Oh, did you hear about da da da?" Now, you don't want to have that happening, but people have views and people will say, "Oh, she had a home birth," and da da da. I met a lot of people at the time. I don't mean a lot, but I mean, considering that I wasn't going out a lot, um, I met quite a few people in the most weird of circumstances who needed to talk. Here I was, I could hardly walk at one stage. I'd had so much loss of blood and I was on so many antibiotics and I'd had, stitches, all sorts of things. I couldn't walk more than 200 meters for a while. And so when I was a bit stronger, I was at the supermarket getting a few basic things. Someone asked me to pass them the milk. Can you open the door? And I did. It must have been something on my face. It must be something in my aura. I don't know, but there was a woman in there who started telling me about her whole um, domestic violence situation in her life for years, and that she had finally taught her son to stand up. And like, I had never even, I didn't even know who she was. And the things like that, when you've gone through a battle and you're probably much more open to these things, and you probably look vulnerable but open
Welcoming. Yeah.
and welcoming, and just a voice, someone who's listening. And I met a number of people like that. I met a woman with a daughter with some terrible disease, and they were
Mm.
trying to keep her alive. And again, I didn't know about her, but I was just walking along the road and mentioned something, and boom. So I think when you've been through the difficult circumstances of any situation in life, you've been down that road, you know something about it. I think we have to use it, and this is where I've come from. You have to use what you've learnt and what you've taken from it to help other people. That's what you have to do. And like you said, it's not about bottling it up. It's about finding the most positive, the best ways to talk about it. So I volunteered for a group of medical students. They were all 18 years old. I mean, I don't even know if they'd ever had a girlfriend, some of these young guys. And I volunteered for I think they call it focus groups, where they try and teach young 18-year-olds who, sorry, but they're probably a bit young probably to be learning medicine. But how do you interact with a client? Like, you've got to take the history. So it's a woman who's coming to you because she's pregnant. You need to ask her history. How many births have you had? How many of them, how many children do you have? And in my circumstances, I had to let them know, right? How do they do that um, respectfully? How do they do it in a way that helps them get the information, but also allows them to check that the woman's okay and doesn't need anything else? It blew their minds. The boys were pretty bad at it. The girls were a lot better. That's all I can tell you. But I'm so glad that they were trying. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what they had to do, right? And um,
So true.
you've, I mean, the only thing you can take from a bad situation in a way at the end of the day is, how can I actually do something? What can I take from it that's going to help, that's going to be positive?
Absolutely. Sometimes the only answer to the question, why me? Why did I go through that? Is so that you
Yes,
can help someone else go through it a little more dignified,
yes,
a little
yes,
more with reason, with justification, with some sort of some sort of an answer to their questions, giving them some information beforehand what to expect. And if they've gone through that, saying that it will get better eventually, you have to go through what you've got through. I don't know why.
yeah,
Mums have gone through stillbirths like you did. Mums have lost their children just after giving birth for a little while for life threatening diseases. I have a friend who had a child who's growing up, but with so many medical complications. Such a wonderful little boy, so smart, so intelligent, but he has these health issues that he's going to live through for the rest of his life. And the parents are like, why us? They were they just changed. The moms and the dads, they are not the same people that they were before giving birth, after they've had these wonderful children or their
yeah.
amazing experiences. I thank you. I thank you for sharing your experience with me, and I hope that we continue our association. There are so many synchronicities in the things that we're doing that I look forward to work with you, Debbie. Yeah,
It'd be fabulous too. And I'm so glad that I found you. And we live in a big network, don't we? Like some
true,
big sort of matrix, but it's finding each other and
true.
connecting. And I must say that probably just to finish here, I think largely due to birth trauma,
Mm-hmm.
because men experience it as well. And my husband was very strong and tried to continue to work, and I was at home. And then one day he just turned around and said, I don't like this place. No one ever supported me here. This is where my child died. And there were a few other extenuating circumstances there. He just got up and said, I can't do it anymore. That's it. And even though we have a business in Sydney,
Mm-hmm.
which, being in one city and having it in the other, isn't simple. So I'm also fully aware that birth trauma affects men
Absolutely.
and in
That's a
different
conversation.
ways.
That's a
It's a different
conversation for
conversation.
it's
And that's why I'm in
men's mental
Melbourne.
health.
That's why I've met you, Asha, because I mean, I might have, but I might not have too. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there you go. There you
yeah.
go.
Men's mental health is certainly something that we should talk about more. They're supposed to be strong. They're supposed to be the pillars of strength, and I strongly believe they need to be allowed to feel more openly. Yeah,
Yes, I think so. And not to feel angry that women are trying to deal with theirs and that they don't,
they
that there's
can't.
nothing for them. There
Yeah,
is something for them. And I did make my attempts, but it's not always it's, I think, something that men too need to do what we do as women, which is talk in our groups and find that support because it's sort of, I think, what they need to reach out for. They don't know that they need to reach out though.
it's true because it's sort of frowned upon in their circles, in the
Yeah.
pubs, in the clubs, in the golf course.
Yep.
It's
That's right.
understandable. It's understandable.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. Asha, so thank you so much. We'll be in contact again, I'm sure.